There is a pass in Greece so narrow that an army 10,000 strong cannot march through it side by side. You would walk it in minutes. It is barely wide enough for a cart. And in 480 BC, 300 men stood in that pass and held back the greatest army the ancient world had ever assembled. Not for an hour, not for a day, for 3 days. And the man who led them knew, fighters, from the moment he chose to go, that he was not coming home. His name was Leonidas, king of Sparta. And this is his story. Most people, when they think of Sparta, think of the movie. The slow-motion kicks, the shouted one-liners, the perfect abs. The real Sparta was something stranger and more extraordinary than any film has captured. It was a city built entirely around one idea: the warrior. From the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and placed into a system called the agoge, a training program that lasted for decades. They slept on reeds they cut themselves. They were given barely enough food and taught to steal the rest without being caught. They marched without sandals. They fought each other. They were beaten and tested and pushed to the edge of what a human being could endure. Not to break them, to find out what they were made of. The ones who survived, the ones who passed through every test, became Spartan warriors, the most feared soldiers in the ancient world. Leonidas went through every moment of it. He was not born to be king. He had 2 older brothers ahead of him in line. He had no reason to expect a throne. What he had was the agoge, the same as every other Spartan boy. The same cold nights, the same hunger, the same endless training. And somewhere in those years, in the reed beds and the marches and the fights that left marks on his body for life, Leonidas became something. A man who did not fear what was coming, because he had already survived everything. The Persian Empire in 480 BC was the largest empire the world had ever seen. It stretched from the borders of India to the shores of the Mediterranean. It contained dozens of nations, hundreds of languages, millions of people. And its king Xerxes, son of Darius, wanted Greece. His father had tried. At the Battle of Marathon 10 years earlier, a much smaller Persian force had been defeated by the Greeks. It was a humiliation the Persian court had never forgotten. Xerxes came back with everything. Ancient sources put the Persian army at over 1 million men. Modern historians are more conservative. Estimates range from 100,000 to 300,000. Either way, it was the largest military force Greece had ever faced. The Greek city-states, when they learned what was coming, did what Greek city-states usually did. They argued. Athens and Sparta were rivals. Sparta and Corinth had their tensions. Many cities were already calculating whether it was easier to simply submit to Persia rather than fight. Some of them did. The ones who chose to fight formed a coalition, a joint Greek force. And they looked at their maps. Greece is a country of mountains and narrow places. If you want to stop an army, you find the narrowest place and you put your best soldiers in it. The narrowest place they found was a coastal pass called Thermopylae, the Hot Gates. Leonidas knew what Thermopylae meant. A pass that narrow could be held by a small force against a much larger one. The terrain would cancel out the Persian numbers. Their cavalry would be useless. Their archers would be limited. It could work. For a while. The problem was the oracle. Before Sparta went to war, Leonidas consulted the oracle at Delphi. The prophecy he received was blunt. Either Sparta would fall, or a Spartan king would die. Leonidas heard this, and he made his choice. He selected 300 men for the expedition to Thermopylae. The selection process tells you everything about who Leonidas was. He did not choose the strongest men. He did not choose the fastest or the most decorated. He chose the men who had sons, because he knew they were not coming back. And he wanted every man in that 300 to have already given Sparta its next generation. He was not sending warriors to hold a pass. He was sending men who had already fulfilled their purpose. And were now being asked to give one final thing: everything. The Greek force that assembled at Thermopylae was not just 300 Spartans. Other Greek city-states sent troops: Thespians, Thebans, Phocians. The total Greek force was somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 men. But the 300 Spartans were the core, the spine of the defense. Xerxes, when his army arrived, could not believe what he was seeing. Scouts reported back that the Spartans at the pass were grooming themselves, combing their long hair, doing stretches, relaxed. Xerxes reportedly laughed. One of his advisors, a Spartan exile named Demaratus, did not laugh. He told Xerxes, "These men are preparing to die, and they are not afraid. This is what Spartans do. Before a battle, they do not expect to survive." Xerxes waited 4 days, certain that the Greeks would flee when they understood the size of what was coming. They did not flee. On the 5th day, he sent his troops forward. What happened in that narrow pass over the next 3 days became one of the most studied military engagements in human history. The Persian numbers were meaningless. The pass was too narrow. They could only send a certain number of men forward at a time, and those men ran straight into the Spartan phalanx. The Spartan formation, shields locked, spears extended, was a wall of bronze and iron that the Persians could not break. Wave after wave came forward. Wave after wave was pushed back. Herodotus records that Xerxes, watching from his throne on the hillside, leapt to his feet 3 times during the battle, not in triumph, in horror. Then came the moment that changed everything. A local Greek man, a farmer from the region named Ephialtes, went to Xerxes. He offered to show the Persians a mountain path, a goat trail that wound through the hills behind Thermopylae and came out on the other side of the Greek position. Ephialtes wanted a reward. Xerxes gave it to him and sent his best troops, the Immortals, the elite personal guard of the Persian king, through the mountain path overnight. A small Greek force of Phocians had been stationed on that path to guard it. When the Immortals appeared out of the darkness, the Phocians retreated to higher ground, and the pass was open. Leonidas received word in the night. He called a council. The situation was now different. The flanking force would arrive in the morning. The Greek position would be surrounded. He told the allied Greek forces to withdraw, and then he told the 300 to stay. There was no military logic left in staying. The pass would fall regardless. So why did they stay? Because Greece was still deciding whether to fight or surrender. Because Athens was still preparing its fleet. Because the coalition needed time. Because someone had to show the rest of Greece that Persia could be resisted. That Persian soldiers bled and fell and could be stopped. And because Leonidas was a Spartan king. And Spartan kings did not retreat. On the final morning, Leonidas led his men forward. Not back into the narrow pass. Forward. Out into the wider ground. He was no longer fighting to hold a position. He was fighting to kill as many Persians as possible before the end. The ancient sources record that the fighting was extraordinary. The Spartans fought with spears until the spears broke, then with swords. Then, when the swords broke, with their hands and their teeth. Leonidas was killed in the fighting. His body fell in the middle of the battle. The Spartans fought to recover it. A fierce, close battle around the body of their king, pushing the Persians back multiple times. They dragged him to a small hill, and there, with the Persian army surrounding them on all sides, with arrows darkening the sky above them. The last of the Spartans made their final stand. Herodotus writes that Xerxes, after the battle, was so enraged by what the Spartans had done to his army that he ordered Leonidas's head cut off and mounted on a stake. It was, Herodotus notes, an unusual thing for Xerxes to do. He respected brave enemies. But Leonidas had cost him something he could not calculate: time, men, pride. The invincible Persian war machine had been stopped for 3 days by 300 men, and the rest of Greece had seen it happen. The Persian army continued south. Athens was evacuated and burned. Xerxes took the city. But the Athenian fleet, the fleet that had been preparing while Thermopylae held, was waiting. At the Battle of Salamis, the Greek navy destroyed the Persian fleet. Without naval supply lines, the Persian land army was crippled. A year later, at the Battle of Plataea, the Greek land forces, now united, now committed to the fight, defeated the Persian army decisively. The invasion was over. Greece survived, and the civilization that survived. The philosophy, the democracy, the art, the science, the literature that would eventually flow from Greece into Rome and from Rome into the modern world survived because of a chain of events that traces back to 3 days in a narrow pass. Thermopylae is one of the better documented events of the ancient world. Herodotus, writing within living memory of the battle, is our primary source. He was thorough, he interviewed survivors, and he cared about getting the story right. But Herodotus was also a storyteller. Some of the numbers are disputed. The famous speeches, including the exchange where a Spartan named Dionysus reportedly says that at least they will fight in the shade, paranfoot. Maybe literary constructions rather than transcripts. The figure of Leonidas himself is partly historical and partly legendary. We know he existed. We know he led the Spartan force. We know he died at Thermopylae. The interiority, what he thought, what he felt, what he said in private, is reconstructed. History tells us a Spartan king died holding a pass. Legend tells us he chose it, knowing exactly what it meant, and walked toward it without flinching. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the choice, the real human choice, made in the dark before the last morning, was exactly what the legend says it was. Some stories survive because they are true. Some survive because they say something true about human beings. The story of Leonidas may be both. 5 lessons from the life of Leonidas. Lesson 1. The narrowest ground is where the greatest stands are made. Leonidas understood terrain. He knew that the right position could cancel out a massive disadvantage in numbers. In your own life, when you are outmatched, outnumbered, overwhelmed, find the narrow ground, the place where your strengths matter most and the opponent's advantages matter least. You do not need to fight on their terms. Find your Thermopylae. Lesson 2. Choose people who have already given something, not people with nothing to lose. Leonidas chose men with sons, men who had already fulfilled their purpose, men who understood what they were protecting. The most powerful commitment is not made by people with nothing to lose. It is made by people who have everything to lose and choose anyway. Surround yourself with people who understand the weight of what they are doing. Lesson 3. Sometimes the point is not to win. The point is to make something possible. Thermopylae was not a victory. By any military measure, it was a defeat. But it made Salamis possible. It made Plataea possible. It made the survival of Greek civilization possible. Not every battle you fight is meant to be won. Some battles are fought to buy time, to show what is possible, to give the people behind you what they need to win the war. Know which battle you are in. Lesson 4. What you do when the retreat is the reasonable option is who you actually are. When the mountain path was betrayed and the pass was lost, retreating was the logical choice. The Allied forces retreated. That was the reasonable, defensible decision. Leonidas stayed. Not because it made military sense, because of what it meant. The moments that define character are the moments when the reasonable option is to walk away. What you do then, that is who you are. Lesson 5. The things that survive are built on choices most people never know about. Most people who live in the world that grew from Greek civilization, the philosophy, the science, the democratic ideals, have no idea that it almost did not survive. They do not know about 3 days in a narrow pass, or 300 men who stayed when they did not have to. The foundations of the world you live in are built on choices made by people who got no credit, no monument, no recognition in their lifetimes. Do the work. Make the choice. The foundation matters even when no one sees it. 300 men. 3 days. A pass so narrow you could walk it in minutes. And the ancient world, the philosophy and the democracy and the science that eventually became the modern world, survived. Because a Spartan king chose to stay, and the world remembered. This has been Legends of the Ancient World, an Alivinci University History Channel production.